Jai Gurudev, everyone. So further to last night's announcement, we are going to, myself, Swami Revatikaanta, are going to go through the cliff notes, the highlights of the Siddhānta, okay? It will be too much to dive into the whole situation. I'm once again going to I'll give you two options. You can either listen aggressively, which is what I like, in these kind of philosophical, that means pumped, aggressive, right? Ears wide open, eyes wide open. That aggressive, I should see that in your faces, that your fury, your fierceness, right? That's one option you have. Or you can pretend you're window shopping and you can just kind of like, interesting point. Forget about that. Interesting point. I leave it to you because we're going to cover a lot of ground on a lot of different topics in a short space of time. Don't panic. You're not going to get an exam afterwards. This is at the very minimal level just to give you a feel of what is going on in the Siddhānta and where we're taking things, what this book is about. I may constantly and shamelessly refer to Swami Revatikaanta's podcast and keep plugging it. Not only because it's an amazing podcast and you hear Swami Revatika's thoughts and arguments, not only because of that, it's because some of the topics I can just touch on lightly and I have to move on. And if you really want a proper fleshed out discussion and real deep dive into these concepts, you're going to have to go to that podcast. Okay? So I might keep referencing that here and there. So we've got a short space of time and a lot to cover. Sampradaya, right? Krishna talks about this chapter 4. Many of you will know he said, I have taught this yoga to who? To Vivaswan, and then it was passed down, and eventually this knowledge was lost. And I have come to resurrect this knowledge. And he talks about Manu, Vivaswan, Manu, King Ikshvaku, and so on, and how this knowledge was lost. There was a parampara, a chain of disciplic succession, and it got broken. And so Krishna says, I've come to resurrect this Sampradaya, this knowledge through the chain of disciplic succession. Sampradaya, you have two options in life on the spiritual path. Either you can play the buffet game, which is, I pick a bit of this, I pick a bit of that. This sounds good. Let's mix it up. And I'll do my own thing. DIY spirituality. It works for some people. It can work. Sampradaya, however, is a system that says, no, this personality or these personalities, I trust what they're saying. I trust their teachings. I connect with these teachings. And I'm willing to put aside my ideas and my concoction of spirituality, and I want to follow the teachings in this lineage, in this parampara, in this sampradaya. Right? Those are the two options. So a sampradaya creates legacy of the apta. I'm using this term apta. Apta just means a very simple word. It just means someone who knows stuff. Right? If you ask somebody who lives in the ashram, where's the dining room? And they say it's upstairs, they are an apta. Right? They are someone who has knowledge. But here, obviously, we're talking about something very different. And when we talk about the apta, we're talking about someone who has this level of realization and who can give this level of realization. And a sampradaya creates a legacy, a consistency amongst the sangha, amongst the community, so that we're all on the same page, traveling in the same direction, supporting each other, under the shelter and teachings of the apta, the one who truly knows, the one who has truly seen Krishna, who knows the supreme truth. Yesterday I was talking about how Guruji was saying, I'm in the realm of experience. The Hari Bhakta Sampradāya is founded on the Apta, who is Paramahamsa Vishwananda, who we have the conviction, who has seen the truth, who embodies the truth, and can deliver the truth to us. That experiential truth. That is the foundation of our Sampradaya, and that is actually the foundation of all Vaishnava Sampradayas. And this is what I was saying last night. What I just said to you just now, I think it makes kind of logical sense to all of us, right? But if you were to present this idea of Sampradaya to a very orthodox, let's say Sri Vaishnava, or Gaudiya Vaishnava, or someone from the Madhva lineage, they probably wouldn't recognize the way that we're presenting it as purely as this. They wouldn't recognize it in that. They have a slightly different understanding. Hence why I said the understanding that Guruji is giving of Sampradaya is the true meaning of Sampradaya, resurrecting the nature of Sampradaya in the 21st century. And the thing about what Guruji does, Guruji is the most open of masters you could imagine. He is steeped in tradition. He has his philosophy. He has his spiritual texts, his ritual. All of these things he has. But at the same time, he is incredibly open. He's incredibly open to other traditions. He is not crippled or in a straitjacket to knowledge, to dogma, to narrow-mindedness. And this is what I was saying last night. He has managed to strike that balance between being overly dogmatic and overly traditional and overly liberal and ungrounded and too open. He has managed to strike that balance. And he said a wonderful thing in Śrī Vittāladam. When we were talking about, when he mentioned different Sampradayas, he said Krishna has many postures. You know, sometimes like Vittala, he's standing like this. Sometimes like this. And he said the shapes of the tilak, they vary because Krishna has different postures. And each Sampradaya is approaching Śrī Hari, Krishna, when he is presenting himself with these different postures. So he was openly talking about this unity, this harmony. And yes, there is a plurality of ways of looking at Śrī Hari. We have our way, but there are other ways. And so you see this situation that Guruji is making. He is not becoming overly dogmatic. Sampradaya gives authority, yes. Authority of the Apta, authority of Paramahamsa Vishwananda and his teachings. But when you overstress authority, suddenly you get into the game of, I'm authoritative, which means by default, you're not authoritative. I am bona fide, legitimate, because I have a parampara and a chain that stretches so far, and I have a purity of lineage, and it says this, and because you're doing something different, you are not bona fide. You are outside. And so this judgment starts to creep in. Sampradaya has to be looked upon, yes, as an authority of the Apta that you have chosen to follow, but it is also a utility, a way of fast-tracking, harnessing your mind, your thoughts, giving you a discipline and a focus to go to the feet of Śrī Hari. And Guruji has managed to create a Sampradaya which crosses so many boundaries. He has woven a garland of Hari Bhaktas. Kabir, the Sant tradition, Mirabai, the Alvas, the Vakari saints, all of the great devotees, Nanak, all of the great devotees of Śrī Hari, he has woven a garland and strung it all together with this philosophy of Tadatmya Vedanta. Okay? And this is the uniqueness of the Hari Bhakta Sampradaya in the 21st century. Everyone with me so far? Yeah. Translators still with me? Yeah. Fantastic. Now, as part of a Siddhānta, you have to, Swami Revatikaanta made reference to this last night, you have to have a justification as to why on earth you're following this path. Or you could do what Guruji said last night and say, Guruji knows. It's Guruji's will, right? The sarcasm, right? Guruji wants us to be able to justify our path, to justify why on earth we have come to the principles we have come to, why we do what we do. So this brings us to the Purvapaksha. Yeah, clear enough? Yeah. Purvapaksha means we have to reverse the gaze and look at how other people might see us. We have to look at the other arguments that people are making about truth. We have to look at the different movements and traditions that are on offer. Why choose the Hari Bhakta Sampradāya? We're not saying you must choose the Hari Bhakta Sampradāya, but why would you choose the Hari Bhakta Sampradāya? And so the Siddhānta goes through, I'm not going to go deep into these points, but the argument for atheism, a purely materialistic argument. You know, there is simply the world, material existence, things just happen at random, Big Bang Theory, and so on. The Siddhānta makes plausible arguments against the notion of atheism. Am I saying we have got the silver bullet and we have destroyed atheism? No, right? These arguments are going to go on forever and ever and ever, back and forth, argument, counter-argument, rebuttal, counter-rebuttal. It's always going to go on. But what we are demonstrating in Siddhānta is we understand the arguments that are on the horizon. The Hari Bhakta Sampradāya has come up. We understand the atheist argument from the point of science, the materialist argument. We also understand the science, for example, the arguments of design, the cosmological argument. All of these things we're presenting to show the reader, and even ourselves, that we understand what is going on. Then we look at, there are religions such as Christianity, Islam, and so on. And we talk about the salvation model of theology. Again, won't go too deep into this, but there are some religions, primarily this is a product of Christianity and Islam, which some versions of Christianity, let me be very clear, some versions of Christianity and some versions of Islam teach that unless you are a Muslim, unless you are a Christian, you are in some way damned. You are in some way condemned, right? There are obviously liberal Christians, liberal Muslims who don't subscribe to that, but that doctrine exists, and wherever that doctrine exists, we call it a salvation model of religion. So the Siddhānta refutes that in some detail. Why do we spend a bit of time on this? Because sometimes devotees find it a little bit uncomfortable. Why are we arguing with religions? Isn't it about love and harmony and so on? Well, let's just say, hypothetically, I'm a Muslim, and I say, unless you convert to my religion, you're going to hell. What does that say about Guruji? It says he's illegitimate or he's confused and he doesn't know what he's doing. What does that say about your mantra? It's completely useless. What does that say about your deity? Not only is your deity in some faiths an incorrect way of worshipping, it is a fast track to hell. Right? So let's get real and let's get honest about what are the ideas that are prevailing in the 21st century, and let us have a response for those ideas to show why we have taken initiation into the Hari Bhakta Sampradāya and why we follow Guruji, right? It's about being mature, not just nicey-nicey all the time, right? Guruji's love, but he's not nicey-nicey, not naive, right? And so the Siddhānta deals with these issues. And then we start talking about what is the other model of religion. This is called the realization model, where we understand that there must be a rasa, an experience that attracts you to a certain teaching, and that teaching is founded by an apta, somebody who truly knows. And so it works like this. The apta will make declarations. The master, the guru, will make declarations about the supreme truth. They will give you a methodology, a sadhana to follow. And then you discover yourself what is happening inside of you, whether this is true or not. And that is how a realization model works. Suddenly, it's not about vain belief and what happens in the afterlife. It happens what's happening here and now. That is the spiritual realization model. Guruji talks about experience first, knowledge second. And so the Siddhānta goes through in some detail the pitfalls of experience. We're not naive about experience. We know you can have a completely deluded, bonkers experience and call it truth, right? Guruji always talks about ungrounded devotees, right? So we talk about different qualifications: Kanishta Adhikari, Madhyama Adhikari, Uttama Adhikari. The Kanishta Adhikari is someone who's not stable in their spiritual experience. So often they'll come. I remember there was a person who was very dogmatic. He had read lots of Shastra, and according to perhaps his Sampradāya, he might be classed as a very high devotee, senior devotee, because he knew a lot. But he came with his rule book to Guruji, and he came there trying to analyze Guruji according to his understanding of what the truth should be. And then when he met that person, Swami Revatikaanta was there with myself, did Guruji start talking about Shastra? Did Guruji start talking about Bhagavatam? Did he start talking about the great acharyas and the Vaiṣṇava acharyas? No. What did Guruji talk about? His jewelry. Yeah. He talked about his jewelry. Yeah. And just how expensive his jewelry is. Right? And that person, he was having a meltdown in front of Guruji. And Guruji was so excited, pointing out his earrings, his rings, how he got this, how he got that. And obviously he was bedecked with jewelry. And this is a very humble Vaishnava, probably had a guru who wore just a loincloth, nothing else, who knows. And then he came to this, and in his mind, I know what he was thinking. This cannot be a real guru. This cannot be a real guru. So in his Sampradāya, perhaps, he was considered maybe a Madhyama Adhikari, something like someone who knows something. But when you understand Guruji, he plays on these ideas. If you're full of dogma, full of judgment, he will just shake the boat. And if you leave, you leave. No loss to Guruji. That's one aspect of Kanishta Adhikari experience, right? Then we look at another aspect. You can be completely ungrounded. I remember there was this guy, he had a fantastic time at Just Love Festival. Amazing time. He was blissful. I mean, I not in the way that Siddhānta describes bliss, but let's just say generically blissful. He was on a high. He was it's like he'd taken something, let's say, right? It's like he was so high, and he used to come up to me, Mayuran, it's so amazing to be here. Guruji's so amazing. I know he's the one for me. I know it. I know he's the one for me. And I was like, fantastic, fantastic. I'm glad you're happy. Then he started saying, do you know, I know he's Krishna. I know he's Narayana. He's the Supreme Lord. And then he opened his eyes and said to me, so what do you think, Mayuran? And I said to him, I said, what should I say to this? And I just thought, I said, the people who make these statements the most are the fastest people to leave Guruji. And that's bursting a bubble, isn't it, I think? And so after 6 months, not that I'm some great prophet, but he left. After 6 months, after making these profound declarations, he left. This is what I mean about spiritual experience, right? Kanishta level spiritual. We analyze this in the Siddhānta. We go through it step by step. But we also give some parameters about spiritual experience, which can give you some idea that perhaps you are on the right path. There is something worth following here. If you feel increasingly more detached from the world, from material existence, I mean. I don't mean run and become brahmachari, but just you feel like the material pleasures of the world are drifting away. And then simultaneously, you gain a higher rasa, a higher taste, and you start to look up and you start to question. If you are encountering this, if you have a direct experience of something transcendent, perhaps an unbelievable coincidence that rocked your world, and perhaps it keeps happening over and over again. Perhaps you meet other devotees in the Sangha who have also experienced similar things. So it's not just you in your own private delusion, but your experience is become reproducible in this environment. And then you refer to perhaps to tradition, to the saints. And then you start to see that all these things are aligned. My point is, this isn't absolute proof of spiritual experience, but it gives you a guide. It gives you a parameter to say, maybe this is something worth following. And then eventually you gain that taste. That's the most important thing. That taste, Guruji was explaining to us, leads to a certain faith. When you explore that certain faith of a certain discipline, you get a higher taste. And then when you go deeper into that higher taste, you get a stronger Shraddha faith. You become cemented. And this is what we call, and this is a key term in the Siddhānta, is pratyabhijñā. Pratyabhijñā, okay? What this means is, this is a recognition of something. Your heart, from deep within, it's not a mental thing. It's not a philosophical thing. Something from within you stirs up and says, I recognize this. I belong here. There is a tremendous, overwhelming sense of ownership on the path. Sometimes that happens just in an instant. Other times it can take time to develop. But this pratyabhijñā is actually the thing that we expand on this a lot, because it becomes the bedrock of spiritual experience. I would say when I first met Guruji, that pratyabhijñā happened as soon as he came down the stairs in Steffenshof ashram. He came down the stairs, long hair. There was only 3 or 4 people in the ashram. No darshan, no function. He came down the stairs. I immediately saw him, and it was like, oh my gosh, that guy. He's back. Like, all these things started coming. He is back. This is it. I have come home. That was just surging in me so much. It was overwhelming, but my mind was saying, don't be ridiculous, stay grounded. This is the Kanishta part of me was coming in, right? And it was saying, you don't know him. You know, is he a real guru? He could be fake. Maybe all these people have just been deluded. Let's analyze, let's assess, let's see if he is of the caliber of a guru, and let's make a decision on my terms, right? And then that ended up being quite a traumatic situation. But that's what I'm trying to say. Pratyabhijñā. When I met him one time in Germany, I was not a devotee. I came to London. There was supposed to be a satsang. I came there hoping that Guruji would come. He didn't come. He stood us all up and said he had to do some other event. And so I felt so hurt that Guruji had not come for that satsang. I remember crying on the train back from London going, how dare he not come and see me? How dare he stood me up like that, like on a first date? How dare he? Again, that was arrogance and ego. I'm not saying that's a great thing, but that pratyabhijñā, that recognition of this is the one. And when that happens, that Shraddha dawns, that becomes the bedrock, the foundation of faith. One last thing, then I'm going to hand over to Swami Revatī. that pratyabhijna, experience first, knowledge second. So we enter a situation through the apta, or through the teachings of the apta, or through the sadhana of the apta, or through the direct personality of the apta, the guru, the master. That conviction awakens, and from that conviction we get knowledge from Shastra, from scripture. Do you see what Guruji says? Experience first, knowledge second. If you go to other Sampradayas, they will tell you, Shastra is the authority, full stop, finished. There's so many issues with that. Again, we made a podcast on that issue. What do you mean by Shastra? What interpretation of Shastra? Which scripture? Which verse? How are you going to formulate an understanding? Why have you picked this one and not this one? The pratyabhijna, the experience first, knowledge second, answers that question of how we view Sampradaya, which is, again, very different to the others. Like I said, I refer you to that podcast that Swami Revatikaanta did with myself, and we fleshed it out more. I will now hand over to Swami Revatikaanta for the next side, the place of Shastra.
Jai Gurudev, feel free to continue to listen to me aggressively as well. So, this will be a bit of a back and forth going forward. I'll do a few slides. Again, it's going to go back to Mayuran and again back to me because, yeah, different areas we want to touch upon. Just to clarify what Mayuran's referring to as well in the beginning when he mentioned the podcast, it's that currently we're filming a 3-part series. Myself, him, Rishabharva Sahadev, discussing the formation of this book and some of the topics in greater depth, each of them about 2 hours long. So they'll be coming out in the next few weeks. That's nothing that is already there, apart from the one he just mentioned now from a couple months ago, but new stuff, okay? The place of Shastra. Obviously, as he said, as he just mapped out, Shastra plays probably the most important role in traditional Orthodox Vaishnavism. Yes, there is a recognition and acceptance that you can only understand Shastra through the lens of the Guru. But the Guru is defined as one who is compliant with Shastra, who is well versed in Shastra. And so in that sense, Shastra is always the 1A to the Guru's 1B, so to speak, in that shared authority environment. In the traditional Orthodox Vaishnava landscape. Yes, as I said, you can only understand Shastra through the lens of the Guru, but the Guru's entire qualification to teach you Shastra is how well-versed and rigorous he is in following Shastra. And then as he points out, the big issue is every Sampradaya accepts a different corpus of what we would term as Shastra. So the Gaudiya Sampradaya would say, yes, but in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami says so and so and so. That is Shastra. To us, it's just the writing of a man called Rupa Goswami. Nice for you, but by that criteria, Mayuran's book, Avatars of the Master, is Shastra. I'm sure nobody here was thinking that that is Shastra and therefore the highest authority in my life, as great a book as it is. So like that, we have different understandings and different bodies of authority that therefore produce different outcomes, different conclusions and arguments that are not, they don't work across Sampradaya lines. Even though they are Vaishnava texts and we're all Vaishnavas, it doesn't work exactly in that way. So let's go back to foundational, let's say, texts. So that means the Vedas, consequently the Upanishads. Vedanta being one of the Saddarshanams, meaning 6 visions of reality as presented in the wider landscape of Sanatana Dharma. Vedanta is, as I said last night, the one that is most relational. It's the philosophy that deals most with the relationship between things. And the way that that relationship is presented and established, traditionally speaking, is based on the statements found within the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutras. This was established as a tradition by Shankaracharya in the 8th century. Now, Can you find supporting material to produce your Vedanta from elsewhere? Of course. What is the reason for that? In chapter 15, verse 15 of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says two things about himself. He says that he is Vedanta Krit and he is Vedavid, which means I am the creator of Vedanta and I am the only knower of the Veda. So by nature having said this, clearly this is not a Shankaracharya system. It's not that Shankaracharya says, I have created Vedanta. He says, I am presenting a method for a formalizing Vedanta. I'm presenting a justification for Vedanta. So I have a position, this is what I'm using to justify that position. But Krishna is the source of all positions. He is the source of the conclusion of truth, Siddhānta. So therefore, one who is in communion with Krishna, who has realized Krishna, who is of Krishna's nature, is consequently also the knower of the Vedas, the knower of Vedanta, and can give from this authority. Right? So when we speak, therefore, of Shastra in traditional Vedanta as we encounter it today, this is post-Shankaracharya, post-Ramanuja, post-Madhva, it has taken a different shape than what it was at the time of Krishna speaking the Bhagavad Gita. Because when Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita, there was no Advaita Vedanta of Shankaracharya. There was no Vasishtha Advaita of Ramanuja. There was God saying, I know philosophy. I know the Vedas. No one else. Right? And so since then, we have what we have described as the landscape. So now we are coming a little late to the party. We are coming to an established landscape of Vedanta, many different Vedantas already presented, and so the question naturally arises, what is the need for you to present yet another version? If there are already so many versions, already some people struggle to reconcile that fact, how can so many realized people present this differently? There are poetic ways that you go about this, as Guruji described with the different postures of Krishna representing the different feet on your forehead, the different shapes of tilaks and all this. Beautiful, poetic, doesn't actually explain why there are different philosophies. You can say my preference is towards Krishna, my preference is towards Narasimha. No problem. That's not contradictory philosophy. That's preferential relationship. Oh, I'm more in this mood of Madhurya, I'm more in this mood of Aishwarya. That's not contradictory. That's just preference. But the minute I say, the Atma is composed of these 6 elements, and someone says, no, it's just composed of these 3 elements, that's not preference. Those are 2 contradictory statements about a reality. It's either one or the other or something else altogether. They could both be wrong, right? And that's where things get a little murkier, right? That's where there's more conflict and division because some of those things cannot be reconciled. And that's why the more honest assessment of this Sampradaya landscape is that we coexist, but we're not actually believing that each of us is equally correct at that philosophical level. It's an uncomfortable truth, let's put it like this. Because whilst we may think that logically and rationally, experientially it can produce bad qualities in us. Because it can produce both judgment and a complex of superiority. And so the devotee has to reconcile these 2 things because they're both true. This is true, and yet if I live according to this, I'm going to become a worse person than I was before. How do I reconcile this? And so in a sense, you have to separate the 2 domains. You have to separate the domain of cold analytical facts, and I'm going to call this tattva. So it means principle, the world of principles and objective reality, and then the world of anubhava, which means experience. The subjective world of interactions, experience. This is to be treated as equally true, equally impactful, perhaps even more so. Perhaps anubhava even more important than principles, than tattva. But we have to separate both and understand there are 2 different types of truth that Vedanta will try to address, that Siddhānta tries to address. We present the facts of principles, but we don't present them in isolation of a different set of facts about how you should behave and how you should conduct yourself and what are the qualities that God desires to see in you. that he necessitates almost to see in you. And so because we're presenting these two things simultaneously, you should not commit the error of only looking at the Anubhava, meaning how you should behave, and dismiss foundational truth claims and principles. You can't do that. And simultaneously, you can't just accept the cold, hard facts. This is true, that is wrong, and orientate your life around that in isolation. You have to marry that to the behavioral principles. When Guruji stands there in the tent last night and says, be a good human being, just as much as he says, understand your path, right? And you have to marry these things. So I'm telling you this as a sort of precursor to what I'm going to now say. Okay? When Krishna says Bhakti Yoga is better than Karma Yoga, which he says objectively in the Bhagavad Gita, he's not saying, I want you as a Bhakti Yogi to hunt out the Karma Yogis and tell them, I'm better than you. You're not wrong in terms of the path you're following. But behaviorally speaking, socially speaking, you are wrong. Because one thing is the path in isolation. Another thing is the path married to the practitioner. You may be practicing Bhakti Yoga terribly, and the Karma Yogi may be practicing it perfectly. What's the criteria then? Who knows? So better shut up. Right? So as I said, classical Vedanta based on the Upanishads, based on Bhagavad Gita, based on Brahma Sutras. Have we done this? Is this book drawing from Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutras? Yes. Does it draw from more than that? Also yes. Guruji's own writings, the Guru Vakya, constantly. Puranas, constantly. The writings and sayings of many saints, constantly. Expanding the horizon. Why? Because in the 21st century, how many of you have read the Brahma Sutras? As expected, maybe one hand went up. Like, I've read 80% of it. Okay. Upanishads, the 10 principal Upanishads, like 2 hands have gone up, 3 hands, 4, 5. Whew. Some budding philosophers here. 5 hands went up. I'm impressed. How many of you read Bhagavad Gita? Perhaps it's just coincidence that the Bhagavad Gita is the shortest one, but perhaps not. No, I'm joking. The relevance that these texts hold in our lives change with time. The emphasis that people place on these things changes with context and time, right? I would say that modern Vaiṣṇavism is far more Puranic than it is based on the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras. Far more. Because the Puranas have what? Stories. Leela. And people love stories and love Leela, some more than others, right? But there's no denying that that is the predominant preference. Why? Because people's thinking is generally speaking of a lower resolution. People's attention spans smaller. And so you need something that catches you and captivates and that is more compelling. Stories, Leela, pastimes. When you start to discuss the intricacies of tattva. Last night there was one godbrother of mine who, having heard the speech last night, having listened to Guruji, thought, I'll pick this up and I'll start giving it a read. So we're sitting there at the dinner table on the side, just chapter 1, page 1. 2 minutes later, I looked again. I called out his name and he woke and he said, it's good, it's good. It's a tough read though, isn't it? Yeah. So, there are obstacles to be overcome, right? Now, as Myron touched upon, and I think it needs to be re-emphasized, the actual reality of Sampradaya, how it comes about, is never as clean as they would like you to believe. So they would like to tell you, here's Shastra, we have looked at it as it is, and here's the outcome that we draw from it. The most obvious and clean and clear interpretation. And therefore, it's not that the Acharya is giving his teaching. The Acharya is just showing you what is obviously there. Okay? It's not true. The truth of it is, when you go into a Sampradaya, say the Śrī Sampradāya, and you say, what is Bhagavad Gita? They're not going to tell you. They're not going to give you a blank Bhagavad Gita and say, read this. They're going to give you the Śrī Bhāsya, which is Ramanujacharya's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. And they say, read that. His Gita Bhāsya. And so when you read it, you're not going to read the Bhagavad Gita neutrally. You're going to read Ramanuja's version of the Bhagavad Gita. So are you really reading the Bhagavad Gita? Or are you reading Ramanuja's teachings? And so when you say, no, this is based on Shastra, it's not true. Because there is no Shastra reaching you without passing first through the lens of Acharya X, be it Ramanuja or Shankara or anyone. And so what you're actually receiving is the Guru Vakya. It's a merging of the Veda Vakya and the Guru Vakya, which means the word of Veda, the word of scripture, and the word of the Guru. As much as they would like to tell you, no, Guru is not adding anything of his own. He's just presenting Shastra as it is, a conduit, a bridge, not adding anything. It's nonsense. If the Guru would not be adding anything, every commentary on Bhagavad Gita would be identical. Because look, we're all seeing the same thing and presenting the same thing. But that's absolutely not the case. They are giving different conclusions because each one is adding his lens, his interpretation. So without any deceit, we're saying the absolute same thing about us. Of course, Guruji is giving his lens, his interpretation. Okay? So therefore it is the marriage of the two. So Tadatmya Vedanta, let's get to the nitty-gritty. Let's start to break it down. Tadatmya, what does Tadatmya mean? Tadatmya means oneness that accommodates difference. And so the way that we present it is Bheda Sahishnu Abheda. So Bheda means difference. Abheda means non-difference. Every dualistic philosophy has their own conception of Bheda Abheda, how to reconcile these two things. You have on one extreme Adi Shankara that says only Abheda, non-difference. And you have Madhva that says only Bheda, difference. Anyone who rests in between these two polars are essentially dealing with one version or another of Bheda Abheda, a simultaneous difference and non-difference. And each has their way of justifying it, how it's possible for reality to be both one and separate at the same time. Okay? And so our version of how to reconcile that is Tadatmya. And Tadatmya is, as I said, a synonym of Tadatmya is Bheda Sahishnu Abheda, which means non-difference or oneness that accommodates difference, okay, or variety. And I'll explain exactly, of course, how that is established. It is not newly presented, as I said, it is absolutely backed up by the Veda Vakya, by the Shastras, by the verses. We don't even, obviously it's too ambitious for Myron and I to sit here now and to start quoting you all the references and to start building the full case. We're dealing with a comprehensive section of the book, yeah? And so again, to unpack it to the nth degree is not possible. But I'll try to establish the two major ways in which we can understand this. I'll do one, Myron will do the other, we can complement each other, okay? The first is on the level of tattva. Remember I said there's tattva and there's anubhava. So principles and then experience. So on the level of principles, we have what we call Tadatmya Sambandha. So Sambandha means a connection. So how something is connected. Okay? Relationship, of course, another suitable synonym. In classical Vedanta, the Sambandha that we have to explore, especially in traditions that try to reconcile Bheda and Abheda, is how to explain the relationship between the object and the object's attributes. So when we talk about a red lotus, for example, or a blue lotus, to be more classical. So a blue lotus, what is the relationship between blue and lotus? Lotus is the object, blue is the attribute. So someone like Ramanujacharya explains that as an organic unity. It's two different things that form an inseparable unity. Okay? So two things that can be seen, factually are seen as one. But hypothetically, you could speak of them as two, because there is that distinction. And they are of different natures. Red is one thing, lotus is another. Blue is one thing, lotus is another. And yet, in practicality, they are inseparable. You're not going to get a blue lotus that isn't blue. It defeats the purpose. Understand? So it's an organic unity of object and attribute. An inseparable unity. When you come to someone like Nimbarka, so Nimbarka Acharya says something a little different. So he uses the example of the wave and the ocean. So it says the wave is both naturally one with the ocean and different. But it's not an organic unity of two separate things coming together to form one, like blue and lotus. The wave is inherent to the ocean. It is part of the ocean, completely non-different to the ocean. But Nimbarka stresses cause and effect, meaning the ocean is the cause and wave is the effect. And so there is between a cause and an effect both oneness and two. There is the cause and the effect that can be spoken of separately, but there is an irrevocable link between the two that you cannot separate, you cannot cut. And therefore you have oneness and difference at the same time. Bheda and Abheda. And that's how Nimbarka establishes it. Guruji's perspective, Tadatmya Sambandha, is actually far more like Nimbarka than it is Ramanuja. Because what Guruji is saying is the same thing. We can use the same analogy, that of the ocean and the wave. But instead of saying that the primary point of emphasis of why the wave and the ocean are actually one, being the unbreakable link between cause and effect, Guruji stresses qualities, shared qualities. What do I mean by that? That the qualities present in the ocean are also present in the wave. So he emphasizes this specific point. So because the qualities in the one are also in the other, there is a oneness between the two. And yet, equally, it is natural to say that wave is different from ocean. So there is naturally both difference and sameness, but the sameness is established on the grounds of shared quality. So what we then talk about is what we term as Tadatmya Vali. So it means the spectrum of Tadatmya. So the spectrum means that there is a range from which something can share qualities or not. So I'll give you an example. Prakriti. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that Prakriti is his lower nature and the Atmas are his higher nature. Those of you said you read Bhagavad Gita, so I'm sure you know this, right? He says, my lower nature is Prakriti, my higher nature are the Atmas. How does that ranking work? It works through this spectrum of Tadatmya Vali, because Prakriti only shares in very limited similarity of quality with Bhagavan. Bhagavan being the totality of all qualities. Because the only quality that Prakriti shares with him is Sat. It has real existence. If we simplify this and say God is Satchit Ananda, Prakriti has Sat. It does not have Chit nor Ananda. We say that matter is not conscious, right? It is inert. Therefore, it has no quality of consciousness. It therefore shares less in common with Bhagavan than the Atmas, because the Atmas are also Satchit Ananda. Correct? So on a spectrum of how similar they are to Bhagavan, the lower nature, Prakriti, will be lower on that spectrum of oneness with God, and the Atma will be higher up on that spectrum. So all the way up, you'll have someone like Shiva, like Devi, like the Satguru. They are most similar to Bhagavan without being Bhagavan. They're at the extreme end of the spectrum of Tadatmya, because they are most similar to him in qualities with the most minute differences in comparison to other beings that we've described, devas and whoever else, for example, right? And so everything exists on this spectrum, everything. And so the relationship between anything and Bhagavan, the Tadatmya Sambandha, is analyzed, is seen through this lens, in a sense. How much there is oneness of quality between that attribute, which we don't really use that word, we go more towards the Shakti, I'll come to that, and the Shakti Brit, meaning the holder of the Shakti, the one who is the point of origin of said Shakti. Okay?
Jogadev, I'm not going to add anything extra to what Swami Revatī said, but that's quite an intense thing that he was going for, right? Agreed, yeah? So let's just go for it. Just, again, repeat it, just so that it sinks in a bit deeper, because this is the beating heart of the Siddhānta in many ways, Tadatmya Vedanta. So Swami Revatī described Tadatmya Sambandha, which means the connection between Ishvara, the Lord, the Atma, the soul, and this material world. What is the relationship between them? The Sambandha relationship between them. And we say it's called Tadatmya, which means they are one. Ishvara, the world, your soul, it's all one, but it accommodates difference. Oneness that accommodates difference. Can you repeat that? Right, that is what Tadatmya means, right? So Swami Revatī described one extreme is, Shankaracharya says, at the ultimate level, this world disappears effectively, it collapses. And there is only Brahman. So only oneness, just consciousness. You can't speak of it, you can't talk about it, nothing. You can't even, no attributes that you can point to or anything. That's one extreme. Then you have Madhvacharya on the other extreme who says, no, it's all different. Everything's different. The soul's different from God, God's different from the world, and souls are different. Difference everywhere. In the middle, we have Ramanujacharya, Nimbarka, Jiva Goswami, and so on. And so they have a simultaneous understanding that Ishvara, the Lord, your soul, and the material world are one, but there's also a difference. And they emphasize this and explain this in different ways. Swami Revatī talked about, for Ramanuja, the blue lotus. There's blue, the color blue, and there's a lotus. And they are separate because blue is separate from the lotus. So there's difference there. But then there is abheda, there is non-difference because they're inseparable. They make a oneness together, organic unity. If two things are inseparable, then they should be considered one. That is Ramanuja's argument. Guruji's argument, Tadatmya Vedanta, is Swami Revatī used the example of the wave and the ocean. The wave, what's the cause of the wave? The ocean, right? It comes out of the ocean. The wave exists in the ocean as potentiality. It comes out of the ocean, right? Your soul is, you've existed eternally, but the potentiality of you is always rests with Bhagavan. And so you emerge from Bhagavan, right? The Atma. The Atma is also pervaded by the ocean. So the water of the ocean pervades the wave, right? So we have cause and effect that we just talked about, pervasion, and then Swami Revatī mentioned the last point, which is the qualities. The qualities of the wave has the saltiness and whatever, wetness or whatever it is, and the ocean has the saltiness and the wetness. Cause and effect, pervasion, and qualities. So this is how Guruji describes in Tadatmya Vedanta the relationship between your soul and God. Cause and effect, pervasion, and the shared quality of qualities. Then Swami Revatī talked about Tadatmya Vali, that there is a spectrum of proximity to the Lord. Prakriti is the lower nature in chapter 7, Krishna says, because it is the Lord. Prakriti is the Lord, but it is the Lord at the other end of the spectrum because it has existence, yes, it is real, yes, like the Lord, but it doesn't have consciousness. That table doesn't have consciousness, but the jiva is closer. Krishna says, my higher prakriti, which means closer to me, is the jiva, the soul, and that has consciousness, it has bliss, and so on. And then Swami Revatī mentioned, even higher than that, we can look at Shiva, Devi, the Sadguru, as even higher than that, even closer to that. And this is taken from a verse in the Vishnu Purana, right? So this is something Guruji describes, Guru Vakya, supported by Veda Vakya, the Vishnu Puran, right? And so this is just a summary. I just want to give you a little breather, and that's it. I didn't repeat anything extra, but just to go over it again.
I'm not used to the whole aggressive speaking, aggressive listening thing. And so I forget that there's a need for repetition and, I'll go back into my framework. being Mayuran is difficult. So, thank you for that, Mayuran. What he made you say was what?
Come on.
You see, I like to burst his bubble also. Oneness that accommodates difference, right? And the technical term for that you can see there. It's Beda Sahishnu Abeda. Okay? What is Beda? It means difference. You see, it's a trick. Because when we translate, we're saying oneness that accommodates difference. But the way you have to write it in Sanskrit is not in that order. But you should always know, because of the A in front, the A negates difference and non-difference. Bheda and abheda. Okay? Dharma, adharma. Yeah? Okay. The next slide, I've pretty much explained it. Let's just run through it quickly. Ishvara, God, is the substance. And jivas, prakriti, us, nature, are his shaktis. So traditionally, as I said, we can use the term attributes as well. But we're using, for the purposes of this Siddhānta, the word shaktis. Okay? So energy of God. It is synonymous with attribute. They can be used in either way. Okay? But shaktis is where we want to go in that direction, so therefore we can become familiar with this. So everything is in a sense a shakti of Bhagavan. Okay? Therefore the relationship between Ishvara, Jivas and Prakriti is a Shakti Brit. As I said earlier, Shakti Brit meaning he who holds the Shaktis. Yeah? The repository of the Shaktis. This relationship is called Tadatmya Sambandha, as was explained, which means that Ishvara exists with the Jivas and Prakriti in a relationship of natural Bheda Abheda. Okay? That relationship is Tadatmya Sambandha. So the way that we have relationship between us, Prakriti, God, is that he is the repository of Shaktis and we are the Shaktis. But we emphasize, as Mayuran said, 3 elements. That is, yes, cause and effect, pervasion, but most importantly, qualities. That we share qualities, and the degree to which we share qualities and therefore oneness is on a spectrum. Okay? So the degree to which we can say we're one with God is higher than the degree we can say that the floor is one with God. But in some sense, it's all one with God, and in some sense, it's not. Okay? Now, let's pass over to Tadatmya-anubhāva. Marga can get back on. And then you'll understand how, this is important, Tadatmya, the word, has to be understood in its multi-uses. So Tadatmya Sambandha, as I explained, is principles, tattva. Yeah? How is Ishvara, Jivas and Prakriti, how is that relationship established? Okay? What is the connection? And how does that lean towards the possibility of both oneness and difference? Oneness is by the shared qualities, the pervasion, the cause and effect relationship, but the difference is also by the absence of qualities in a sense. So because there is also some distinction, because there is also something that is not a one-to-one, difference is also simultaneously established, just as oneness is also established. But the whole experiential domain, the whole way in which this now translates into what will you experience in your heart, what will you experience to your consciousness, is Tadatmya-anubhāva. Mayuran will explain that now.
So, Sambandha, the connection, right? So, let's say the Sambandha between me and Swami Revatikaanta is, he is a Swami, I'm a devotee, we are part of the knowledge team, and we have known each other for X number of years and done lectures together. That is a Sambandha situation. Very dry, very factual, very matter of fact. This is the reality of the situation. But if I say, he's my bro, you know, he's very dear to me, you know, and he always supports me, and this feeling of connection is so profound. And maybe we put in, Maybe we put an end to it there. But so what is that? That's not Sambandha anymore. We're into a different situation. That's Anubhava, right? That's Anubhava. That's experience. That's relationship. But now it's Tadatmya-anubhāva. So one was a factual situation, a constitutional situation between Ishvara, the Lord, Atma, the soul, and the material nature. Now we start talking about what happens as the Uttama Bhakta, the highest devotee. What does he experience? He experiences Tadatmya-anubhāva. What does Tadatmya mean? You need to be, look, we said this 4 times now, yes? So this should be like, you should bring the house down now. Okay, Shankari Dasi, I know she gets it. This is very quiet side of the room. Say it really loud. Oneness that accommodates difference. Right? Say it with such passion. Because this is a yeah. This is the Vedānta of Guruji. Oneness that accommodates difference. So what happens in this situation? Tadatmya-anubhāva with Śrī Hari, right? It is the union. Guruji uses words like immersion, the experience of immersion, the experience of union, the experience of fusion. These are in his satsangs. There may be others. I'm not saying exclusively these 3 words, but for me, these were the words that often stood out in his tweets and in his satsangs. The bhakta is so immersed in Śrī Hari. There is such a strong relationship of union. They fuse with the Lord. And I used to always get very nervous when gurus would say stuff like that, because I thought, is he obliterating the soul? Is he talking about merging? Then he would often say, no, I don't mean merging. And remember last night I was saying, I kept trying to make him conform to, say, Ramanuja or something else. It was statements like this that after reflection I started to realize, no, he means something very different actually. This is unique to Guruji himself. And when we eventually came up with this Siddhānta, and I went to Guruji in Vrindavan, and all I did was I repeated back to him his own satsangs, and I said, Guruji, we are concluding, is this what you mean? He said, exactly that. Exactly that. And he said, this is the philosophy that I am giving. It's different to Ramanuja. It's different to any other Vaishnava Acharya. This is the philosophy that I am giving to my devotees. Okay? So this Tadatmya-anubhāva comes about for the Uttama Bhakta. Once that Uttama Bhakta has fully surrendered and received that grace, it can only happen with grace, and he has that pure devotion, the Ananya Bhakti, which you're going to talk about later, like Bhakti and love, yep. That nature of Bhakti, then the experience of Tadatmya-anubhāva comes up. The devotee feels one with the Lord. The devotee has a union with the Lord. The devotee fuses with the Lord, but there is no obliteration of the jiva tattva. What do I mean by that is, the jiva, your soul, never merges and disappears. That is a red line in any kind of abeda situation. Then you're into a different realm. That is not what Guruji is saying. There is no obliteration or disappearance of your soul, but there is an immersion, a union, a fusion. Now, how does this happen? First of all, what does Guruji say about the mind? Does he say your mind is destroyed? No. What does he say about our mind? Transformed. He always says it in satsangs. Transform the mind. So the example that is used is just like you put an iron, right, and you put it in fire, it becomes red hot. It becomes red hot. And so like that, the iron becomes of the same nature as fire. So through your sadhana, through your dedication, through your surrender, through sainthood, the Uttama Bhakta receives the grace and becomes immersed in Bhagavan. The Lord takes over the Bhakta. Just like an example that Guruji uses is the pot and the ocean. When you throw the pot into the ocean, what happens is the ocean is inside the pot. It surrounds the pot. Everywhere is the ocean. For the pot, the perception is there is only the ocean. And this is what we call the mind. I was making this point in Jamashtami. Patanjali talks about, in his Yoga Sutras, Chitta Vritti Nirodha. It's a famous sutra that he says, stilling the fluctuations of the mind. Our mind, that's the point of yoga. But then the bhakta doesn't have complete nirodha, which means complete destruction of the mind or dissolving of the mind. It has ekavritti, which means only the perception of the Lord. Only perception. Kabir, Nanak, the alvas. Alva itself means immersion in devotion. So they are immersed in the Lord, in the presence of the Lord, and they have the ekavritti. They can only see the Lord. And what does Krishna say? Vasudeva Sarvam. After many, many births, the wise person realizes Vasudeva Sarvam. What do the Upanishads say? Sarvam Kalvedam Brahma. All of this is Brahman. That is Tadatmya-anubhāva. The saint realizes there is only Krishna. There is only Krishna. The transformed mind, which is made up of your ego, ahamkara, your chitta, your subconscious, and where your heart is, the manas, the mind, the senses, all of that becomes utterly transformed. It becomes divinized. It becomes taken over. And as a result, there is only the Lord. Guruji also makes a statement where he talks about this identity. And this used to always throw me sometime when I say, listen. He said the bhakta takes on the identity of the Lord. And I think, what does that mean? Is that merging again? Oh God, I used to get nervous. What does that mean? And no, it means this. And Ramanuja says this, that's what he means. So no, Guruji was again making a very specific point. Currently, I have an identity. I, ahamkara, I'm a devotee. I am a dentist. I play mridanga. I am married. I am a father. I am multiple identities formulate my personality. All hinged and founded on the ahamkara, the ego, I and mine. As soon as you have ahamkara, I and mine, there is a story. I have this and this is mine. And then from that, multiple identities come up. The bhakta, the uttama bhakta, in the state of tādātmya-anubhāva, renounces all identities, has his whole mind and what we call antakarana, his whole mind transformed by the grace and presence of the Lord, is pervaded by the Lord, and then only realizes there is only him. Tukaram says in his Abhangs, there is only Vitthal. There is only Vitthal. Currently, I will say, I am serving Krishna. Me. Guruji always says, the song of I am doing this, I am doing... I am serving. Why? Because I'm a conditioned soul with ahamkara. I am serving. If you go to the other extreme, Shankaracharya would say something like, I am Brahman, aham brahmasmi, and he would mean literally, I am all that is. Or if you want to be a little bit more contentious, I am Krishna, like that. That's the kind of Advaitic situation, right? He crosses a red line where the Jiva Tattva disappears and you declare, you are everything. I am everything. I am everything, right? That is the kind of Advaitic statement. The conditioned soul statement is, I am serving Krishna. Still that division. What does Tukaram say in the state of Tadatmya-anubhāva? He doesn't say, I am looking at Krishna. He says, there is only Krishna. It's a very subtle thing, a very subtle difference. It means there is no thought of I and mine. Tukaram is not saying, I am seeing Krishna, I am serving Krishna and Vittal. He's saying, there is only Krishna, there is only Leela. Everywhere I look, I just see Vittal, 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 everything, his name, his form, everything. There is no sense of I and mine. So what is this? This is the Atma, the purity of the Atma, becoming immersed, pervaded, and covered, and taking on the identity of Bhagavan to realize that part is just a part of the whole and has no other existence, no other reason, no other motive. It is the part saying, I am just part of the whole, or there is just the whole. No recognition of me and mine. What does Guruji say about Kabir? When I am here, Hari is not here. When Hari is here, I am not here. Because the perception of the Uttama Bhakta is one of Tadatmya-anubhāva, Vasudeva Sarvam. There is only Krishna. The pot is falling into the ocean, immersed in Krishna. No thought of I and mine. Guruji uses another example. He says the ambassador. He said, when an ambassador of a country comes, he carries the uniform. He carries the signature of his government, of his country. Every word that he says is a representative of his country's government. Like that, the Bhakta is constantly reflecting the will of the Lord at all times, because he only identifies with the Lord. And this was our debate, actually, the why I lost the debate, was I was trying to say, no. The Jiva says, I love you. I love you. And Guruji said, no. Doesn't work like that. Ahamkara is transformed. There is no I and mine. There is only him. There is only him. That is Tadatmya-anubhāva. So understand, that is the experience. And when that immersion happens, when that pervasion happens, there is a oneness with the Lord, but it accommodates difference. Experientially, I feel that there is only him, but the jiva, the atma, is not destroyed. Do we understand that? Yeah. Okay. So Tadatmya Sambandha, Swami Revatikaanta described, that is Tadatmya-anubhāva. Yeah, go.
Just to add something here, another example, perhaps to illustrate the same thing Mayuran has said. So I'll demonstrate this to you now. When we talk about this ekavritti, so this one object of thought or one thing that you're focusing on, we can do this right now in our current experience. I may choose to focus in on one person. I'll look at Swami Pratibha, okay? And as I'm looking at her, I know that there are other people here too, but the more I look at her and focus on her, everything else ceases to exist, quote unquote, because I'm absorbed in her. We can do that with our eyes right now as human beings. You can choose to focus in on something, and everything else in your periphery ceases to matter in a sense, or ceases to be part of your cognition. Let's put it like this, right? And so, due to this absorption, the facts, the tattva, which says there are hundreds of people in this room, gets replaced by the anubhava that there is only one person in this room, to my experience. I'm only experiencing one person, even though there are hundreds, because I'm so absorbed in that point of focus, that ekavritti, that everything else ceases to exist to my experience. It doesn't cease to exist in fact. It doesn't actually cease to exist. It's not that the hundreds of people in the room have actually disappeared, but to my experience, they have. I'm only experiencing the thing I'm focused on. You understand? There is only Vittala. There isn't even me, the experiencer of Vittala, because there is factually, but not cognitionally, not to my experience, because I'm essentially saying that in this depth of immersion, there's even forgetfulness of myself, which Guruji often speaks about. You have to forget yourself. Mayuran is saying, no I, no mine, right? Factually, there's always I, but experientially, there's no I. You see, so in that sense, anubhava does not destroy tattva. It places itself over it. It overpowers it. So it goes to something like this, right? Yeah, the two, one covers the other. You understand? I can't hold the mic and do it. It's not that the one gets destroyed or ceases to exist, but the other covers it. So the fact of difference is covered by the experience of one. Understand? Make sense? So you focus so much on Bhagavan, you're so immersed in him, that at some point there is only Bhagavan. I don't even see the tree that Bhagavan is pervading. I just see the Bhagavan pervading the tree. Because such is my absorption in Bhagavan that to my experience, to my Anubhava, everything is destroyed. Although, factually, in a more dry way, as Mayuran was explaining the two ways in which he can explain our relationship, dry and then non-dry, similarly, we focus on the relationship, on the love, all of these principles, but underlying that, there's still a fact that I exist and God exists and we are separate. Understand?
Right, so that is the distinction. So Tadatmya-anubhāva leads to this profound thing. Here we have a temple filled with the saints. And we call them saints because they experience this material reality as Vaikuntha itself. Prakriti, Bhagavad Gita talks about Prakriti being dukhalaya shashvatam. It is something that is a place of suffering, and it is temporary, it's transient. For the conditioned mind, for the conditioned soul, yes, that when Guruji speaks about this world is like this world is like that, he's talking about it from the conditioned perspective. But from the perspective of the saints, this Prakriti becomes Bhu Vaikuntha, or Prakriti Mishra Vaikuntha is another way of putting it, which basically means the material substance is there. But what did we say is the Sambandha relationship? We said cause, pervasion, qualities, right? And so what the saint in the state of Tadatmya-anubhāva, through the grace of the Lord, they realize this ekavritti, yes, but everything becomes the Lord. So they look around. Of course, they acknowledge. Saints are grounded, right? They understand that there is people here. It's not that they just don't see the people or they don't see a table. But they understand the whole thing is pervaded by the Lord. It is coming from the Lord. And as Swami Revatikaanta said, that experience of the Lord, of Śrī Hari, eclipses the material perception, overshadows the material perception. And so this world becomes a world of love. It becomes a Vaikuntha on earth. It is the example that we often use is a TV channel, same TV set. You change the channel, suddenly you're in a different space altogether. When you're in Kenya, Guruji just simply said to us now, he said, Vaikuntha is literally here right now. Why? Because the Lord is pervading everything. You raise your consciousness and then suddenly Vasudeva Sarvam, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. All of this is Vaikuntha. One time Guruji was giving a satsang and somebody asked a question and said, Guruji, this world is full of suffering. There's so much suffering in this world. What can we do to help? And Guruji got annoyed. I thought Guruji would be like, what you have to do is give love, get the Guru's teachings, step out and help. He was like, why do you say this world is full of suffering? It's not full of suffering. You don't see the beauty in this world? You don't see the wonder in this world? You don't see the presence of Śrī Hari everywhere? That is the perception of a saint. Because the definition of Vaikuntha is the constant darshana of the Lord. The constant darshan of the Lord is Vaikuntha. Sometimes in a satsang, I will say, we should attain Vaikuntha. And people say, I don't want Vaikuntha. I just want to know surrender to Guruji. It's the same thing, right? Just because we use a theological term, Vaikuntha, surrendering to Guruji, knowing the love of Śrī Hari, whatever it is, that highest supreme abode which does not decay, the Akshara Brahma, that is Vaikuntha. So, Prakriti Mishra Vaikuntha, I quote what Guruji says here. It is not that Bhagavan is in another world somewhere and bhaktas are in this world here. No, there is a fusion of this reality. What does Guruji say about going to Vaikuntha? He says after death, what does he say? Don't think that you can just go and grow some wings and fly to Vaikuntha, right? Remember he said that. The task of a devotee is to find God here. This world must become a Vaikuntha. Even Guruji makes this an imperative. This is an essential thing for devotees, that they understand that this world, this Prakriti, must be transformed through grace for our surrender to see God everywhere. If you don't find God here, if you're miserable here, Guruji says, what makes you think you can go over there and find God? This is different to the Śrī Vaiṣṇavas. This is very different to the Śrī Vaiṣṇavas. The Śrī Vaiṣṇavas will say, as long as you have a body, a physical body made of the 5 elements, you have karma. Prarabdha karma, they call it. So as long as you have a body, you cannot have the constant darshan of the Lord and be in Vaikuntha. We disagree. We disagree. Because in the state of tādātmya-anubhāva, the Lord himself transforms your mind. The Lord himself divinizes your whole body. Why does Guruji treasure the relics of saints? Because they're being pervaded by the Lord. They're divinized. Their skin, their bone, their nail, even their clothing, whatever it is, it's been divinized. They're not ordinary mortals. They have transformed this world into a Bhu Vaikuntha because the Lord has immersed himself in that bhakta. And it also does an amazing thing, this concept. Prakriti is no longer this terrible prison cell that we must break out of. Prakriti is actually the Lord himself. It's an abode of the Lord himself. And the Atma, our soul, is traveling lifetime after lifetime through this abode of Prakriti, where our relationship is blossoming and blooming. The rasa, the uniqueness of our relationship with God is blossoming and blooming, and it has to happen in this Prakriti Mandalam. It has to happen in this material world. Guruji's philosophy doesn't denigrate this material world. It elevates it up to the potentiality of being Vaikuntha itself. Right? That is a stunning thing. You understand that philosophically. Next time you go and look at a tree, think about this. This is what I'm trying to say about philosophy. You go and look at a tree. You go and look at the madness of the world, and you tell yourself, somewhere at some level, this is Vaikuntha. This is Vaikuntha. This whole world, even if there's pain and suffering, even if there's limitation, this is a Vaikuntha. The saints understood that. And it's a fundamental and very, very beautiful point. And through the Prakriti Mandalam, we go to Padamapada, the supreme abode. This is what happens. This is Vaikuntha, not at the material level, but once this body is shed. So it's still Vaikuntha. What is the definition of Vaikuntha? Constant darshan of the Lord. Constant darshan of the Lord. In this Bhu Vaikuntha, this is where you find so many saints. I mean, Guruji once, I think in Narada Bhakti Sutras, he was quoting Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, how he was in this ecstatic state when he used to see the dark clouds. This is Shyam Sundara, right? The trees and so on. All of Prakriti became a massive reminder, manifestation of the Supreme Lord. Yeah.
I just want to say something, because last night when Guruji said, he said the mentality of the devotee is that when he sees a mouse, he'll say, oh, Ganesha. And when he sees the monkey, he says, oh, Hanuman, right? I don't know if you guys heard this. So someone came to me afterwards and said, Swamiji, isn't that dangerous? Like, can't that lead to a lot of ungroundedness and all this? So the person misunderstood, and I want you to understand, because what he's saying now, Chaitanya, he sees the clouds, he thinks of Krishna, etc. When you see that monkey, And Guruji says the devotee thinks, oh, Hanuman, it's not that the monkey is Hanuman. Hanuman has appeared to you in your mind, triggered by the monkey. You understand? It's what it causes you to think about, not that you then say, that is Hanuman. Right? That's the ungroundedness. That you see the tree or you see the cloud and you go, look, Krishna. No. Look, Krishna. Krishna manifests in your mind as a result of seeing this. It's not that you then go and say, bow down to that cloud. Right? Of course you could. Krishna is pervading it also. But this is how you, in a sense, both drink the nectar that this kind of vision can grant you, this kind of mentality can grant you, whilst remaining with your feet on the ground. Understand? It's that these things are appearing to you, but not in the outside, but in your mind, in the reality of your consciousness. So these are triggers for the manifestations that happen inside. And that way you are not imposing anything onto this sort of objective reality that everybody else is participating in. Okay?
So that's Bhu Vaikuntha. Then Guruji talks about Paramapada, that this supreme abode of Vaikuntha, again, it's just Vaikuntha, constant darshan of the Lord, but without any material element to it, no limitation of the material world. And one time I was with Guruji, and I asked him, I said, what is service like in Vaikuntha? And I asked him this twice. And he said to me, there is nothing I can say about it. Then I said, but Guruji, we serve you, we give you whatever it is, prasadam for Giridhari and so on. I said, is it like that? He said, no, nothing. I said, but Guruji, there must be something you can say about this. He said, no, nothing. And it's a stunning realization that all our concepts of service is conditioned by an action. I do this, then I do that. There is a beginning, there is an end. There is this specific thing here and a specific thing there. And that's what we class as service. But Nitya Das, Kainkaryam in a Śrī Vaiṣṇava sense, is something completely transcendent from any material conception. Service, seva, is the very instinct of the Atma to glorify the Lord, to glorify the Mahima of the Lord. That is the definition of service. What we class as service, if I play mridanga when Guruji is singing, that mridanga action is merely a vessel for my attempt at glorifying him. If we write to Siddhānta, it is merely a vessel for my attempt to glorify him. All of these things are material actions that allow us an avenue, a channel for our soul to glorify him. And that is what seva is. But in that Paramapada, where there is no material realm in that supreme realm, you can't say, I'm doing the Siddhānta in Vaikuntha. You can't say, I'm going to be playing mridanga in Vaikuntha. It's indescribable. And that's the point that Guruji was making. Words cannot go there. But it's not the same, when I make a clear point here, it's not the same as Shankaracharya describing Brahman. When Shankaracharya describes Brahman, that's the Advaitic situation, he says, words cannot touch it, words cannot go there. But when we describe Vaikuntha, we could describe the relationship connection, the Anubhava. But what we cannot describe is how that Anubhava crystallizes into certain actions and specific events in that realm. We'll go to the Bhagavatam and you'll find very vivid descriptions of Vaikuntha. There are vimanas, airplanes flying around. There is blossoming trees. There's 1,000 Lakshmis or whatever it is. All of these descriptions you have. Even Ramanuja in his Vaikuntha Gadya, he makes a very vivid description of the chambers of Vaikuntha and so on. Guruji says those are for meditational purposes. Right? We meditate on those. But to say that that realm is literally like this poetic description, that's not what we're saying. So these has a utility, but that supreme realm is where service happens in its absolute purity, just like in Bhu Vaikuntha for the Uttama Bhakta. but it happens in a way that you cannot contextualize with any material elements. Do you understand what I'm saying? Good. He also talks about, Guruji said, you have to become Vishnu-like. Not Vishnu himself, but Vishnu-like. And he talks about the spiritual body, the Divya Deha. And he talks about, and what he was talking to Swami Revatikaanta about some years ago, is that this spiritual body is inherent in the Atma. And it is inherent in the Atma, and it is a body that is spiritual in nature, what we call Shuddha Sattva, right? Spiritual in nature, and is a representation of the rasa of our relationship with the Supreme Lord. So each of us has a spiritual form in that supreme abode that manifests once we leave this material world. So those are things that I don't want to go too deep onto. I'm going to go straight to this point here. Time is short, isn't it? Yep, you've got stuff to do. Right. Tadatmya-anubhāva, the experience of immersion, this oneness that accommodates difference. God is one. Śrī Hari is one, but he can be perceived in different ways. And these are the 4 different ways. Brahman, Bhagavan, Paramatma, and Brahman. I'm going to start with number 4 first and work our way up. Brahman is what Shankaracharya would say is the ultimate realization of God. We would say that Brahman is actually the initial perception of the Lord. It's not the highest realization. Just before I continue anymore, the word Brahman it means different things in different texts. If you go to the Upanishads, you will hear the word Brahman a lot. But if you go to other texts, you'll hear Brahman in a different context. You have to be very careful with Sanskrit terms, okay? And we can't be too fixated with terms saying, Mayuran said Brahman means this, and I read in this Upanishad, Brahman is like this. I don't understand. Brahman in the Upanishads just means the supreme truth. Brahman in this context of this Siddhānta means the impersonal aspect of Śrī Hari. So when the Advaitin, let's say Ramana Maharshi or Nisargadatta Maharaj, who Guruji quoted recently, he says when they perceive reality, when they perceive the truth, they perceive Śrī Hari without attributes or almost no attributes. He is consciousness. You don't have this deep relationship. You don't have this two-way relationship of love, of devotion. There is no description of his form and his attributes. Guruji described when we were on the walk with Guruji, he said, it's like if somebody has heat coming from their body. You can perceive the heat and feel the heat, but if you don't see the body, but just feel the heat, that is Brahman realization. Another time, Guruji described Brahman realization as the shadow of the toe of Narayana, right? So the impersonal realization, the Advaitin, the Advaitavad that Shankaracharya proposes of Brahman is what we would class as a very initial understanding and perception of the supreme truth. It is, the key thing here is it is impersonal, which means without lots of attributes. That's the Brahman realization. Then we go to the 3 others, Parabrahman, Bhagavan, and Paramatma. When Guruji talks about the Uttama Bhakta, what does he say? He says, firstly, you have to realize the Lord within, and then you see him everywhere outside. You heard Guruji say that? He says it so often in satsangs. Firstly, you have to realize the Lord within, and then you realize him everywhere outside. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, from within the hearts of my devotees, I lift the lamp of knowledge and dispel the darkness of ignorance. The Paramatma is the initial revelation of the Lord for the Uttama Bhakta attained through grace and devotion. It is the initial recognition of the Lord where he bursts out from within, pervades the Uttama Bhakta, transforms the mind, ekavritti, one-pointedness, and then because of that acceleration of the Paramatma, it bursts out into the Parabrahman realization. So Paramatma realization is the inception, the beginning of the personality of the Supreme Lord, Śrī Hari. It then manifests outside. And this is where we see Parabrahman. The Guruji describes, he says the impersonalists commit suicide into the void. Call that the Advaitin, maybe Buddhism as well. But the Bhakta commits suicide into the fullness. He said at the end of Shandilya Sutras, I believe. Right? And what he means by that is the total immersion, tādātmya-anubhāva, into the fullness. So it's not that we enter a void or it's just consciousness or there's no attributes. It's that the whole world becomes, as we said, Vasudeva Sarvam, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. All of this becomes Krishna. The laughter of a child becomes the laughter of Krishna. The sun shining becomes the benedictory hand of Krishna, of Vittal on my head. The whole world is alive with his attributes. All I see is Krishna. That is the Parabrahman realization. Everything becomes an attribute, the fullness of Śrī Hari. Paramatma realization leads to the Parabrahman realization. And then you can also have another realization, which is Bhagavan realization, which is the Lord who actually appears in a kind of condensed form of bliss, is the way we would describe it. Because the Lord is bliss himself. He is love. When Mother Yashoda is looking at Krishna and he's eating the mud and she asks him to open his mouth, what does she see? All of creation, the whole universe inside his mouth. Do you know the story of Kakabhushandi, the crow? That when he goes into Rama, and then he sees all the universes in Rama as well, Lord Ram. Yeah? So you see, there is just what we call a two-handed, seemingly limited, condensed form of bliss, the Lord himself, Bhagavan. But paradoxically, mysteriously, within that two-handed form is the entirety of creation. So it's not limited. And so these perceptions, Paramatma, within the heart, there is a surge of prema. It is realization. It's not just perception. It's a state of consciousness with a perception. If it was just perception, you could call it a vision. I had a vision of Narasimha. And then it disappeared, and now I'm back to normal and I'm miserable. Right? That's not what I'm talking about. When the Paramatma perception happens within your heart, it's a realization, a state of consciousness. And then you perceive him outside in everything, in every attribute of life. That is the Parabrahman, the fullness of life. And then you can also perceive him as a condensed form of bliss. Okay? And I'll bring you this diagram here. Maybe the visuals are better, right? Śrī Hari is in the middle. The truth of Śrī Hari is actually inconceivable because he's just the fullness of the fullness of the fullness beyond any attribute we could possibly imagine. And no attribute can do justice to the nature of Śrī Hari. But he can be known and perceived as the Parabrahman, which is the fullness of everything. He can be perceived within the heart as the Paramatma. He can be perceived as Bhagavan in a condensed form of bliss. Like that, the Uttama Bhakta in the state of Tadatmya-anubhāva is experiencing Prem and the grace of the Lord. And I want to just make this last point before I hand it to Swami Revatikaanta. These perceptions are not necessarily fixed. Let's not get too dogmatic and say, that's Paramatma, and that saint had Parabrahman, and that saint had Bhagavan. It's perfectly possible for a saint to feel the fullness of the Lord within his heart, and in 1 minute go into an ecstatic bath where he's running around looking at the mountains and the sky and realizing that all of life and laughter and all of the emotions and experiences is the Parabrahman, and then suddenly Krishna appears to him and offers him butter and in front of him in a condensed form of Bhagavan. Like that, there is an interplay of perception, all founded on a realization of prema and love, immersion, fusion, union, Tadatmya-anubhāva, a oneness that accommodates difference in the experience of the Supreme Lord Śrī Hari. So I'll leave that there. Hopefully you understood that. Great.
So this diagram is very useful. So, I would take a picture of it. Because it starts to explain exactly what Mayuran was just saying, that these are all simultaneously one and different. But different in the sense of the experience, different in the way that they are encountered and the way that they engage with us. But they are all Śrī Hari. So there is not a hierarchical situation here. It is not that Bhagavan is more Śrī Hari than Parabrahman or Paramatma or anything of that type. Okay? So let's move on. Bhakti. Defining Bhakti in our Siddhānta is important because Bhakti, as much as it is a universally understood principle, it does differ from tradition to tradition. Let me set the foundation, sort of the framework, and then I'm going to go into the specificities of our exact definition of Bhakti and how you can actually break that down. So Bhakti is both a path, which we call Bhakti Yoga, a means to unite, yoga, and it is also what we term as a Purushartha. So Purushartha means a goal, an objective. So Bhakti is the means, Bhakti is the goal. Okay? Both exist. And what we term as the Purushartha version of Bhakti, we can actually call Para Bhakti. So there's higher Bhakti. Okay? And Para Bhakti is synonymous with Prema, with divine love. So just as a very basic framework, you have Bhakti as a means, as a path, Bhakti Yoga. You have Bhakti as an outcome of said path, Para Bhakti. And Para Bhakti is synonymous with Prema, love for God, exchanging love with God. Okay? We also have what we term as Apara Bhakti. And Apara Bhakti, the opposite, so not the highest Bhakti, but a lower Bhakti, is what we call secondary Bhakti. So Guruji spoke about this in the Shandilya Bhakti Sutra. Shandilya Rishi presents his concept of Apara Bhakti as being essentially that which is supporting Bhakti. So he calls, for example, Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga Apara Bhakti. So for him, they're actually still within the realm of Bhakti, within the scope of what he would define as Bhakti, just makes the distinction between secondary and primary. So secondary means that which supports Bhakti, primary is Bhakti Yoga itself, and the outcome of that is this Para Bhakti, this highest state, which is love. Okay, Tadatmya-anubhāva, as Mayuran was explaining earlier. Okay, the pinnacle of this experience. Now, obviously, in defining Bhakti, the natural question is, okay, and how do we get it? How is it developed? How is it acquired? How is it grown, in a sense? So this little quote from Guruji here, just to explain that. Guruji says, Bhakti is developed only by the grace of the Master. There is no other means. Okay? Developed by the grace of the Master. Not that it is acquired by the grace of the Master. This is an important distinction because we state that Bhakti is inherent to the soul. The soul is not a substance that is devoid of Bhakti. It is eternally relational with God. Even when it's in this conditioned vessel, in this conditioned world, it is still relational with God. It's just in a prison. It is unable to experience that relationship because it's in this material Maya prison, in a sense. But it never has an absence of devotion towards God. Understand? And so therefore it is not that how does one acquire Bhakti, it is how does one develop Bhakti. And so the development of Bhakti is by the grace of the Satguru. And what the Satguru does is that he removes the prison. Essentially, he works with you to remove the prison. And why it is necessarily that way, why does Guruji say that? Because you cannot remove the prison by yourself in its totality. You can remove the prison to a certain extent, but there are certain certain coverings that cannot be removed by your own will because they are not yours to remove, in a sense. Okay? So our Sampradaya's definition of Bhakti is as follows. This is important. Bhakti is an exclusive flow of loving consciousness towards Bhagavan that results in a deep feeling of belonging, is expressed as seva, and puts an end to all suffering. Okay? This definition is very carefully worded. Every word matters. I want to break it into two parts because the way we define things is also important. It's about making our thinking a little more sophisticated in a sense. So we have the term lakshana, and lakshana can mean definition. So what is the lakshana of bhakti? What is the defining factor of bhakti? What is the definition of bhakti? And lakshanas are of two natures. You have the swarupa lakshana and you have the tatastha lakshana. The swarupa lakshana means what is the inherent definition of the thing, and the tatastha lakshana is what is the subjective definition of the thing. I'll explain it using the example of the sun, as we do in the book. The sun inherently is a ball of plasma, burning, yeah? But subjectively, we as human beings on planet Earth may speak of it as that ball of plasma that rises in the east and settles in the west. Yeah? It's an accurate description, but the second part is only subjectively relevant to me as a person standing on Earth looking at the sun. It's not inherently true of the sun. The sun, independent of me, the observer on Earth, does not rise in the east and set in the west. Understand? And yet it is a true statement, it is a true definition of the sun from my subjective perspective as a person on Earth. Yeah? So inherent definition, which is independent of any observer or anything else, and then there is the subjective definition, which is dependent on a individual perspective. So swarupa lakshana and tatastha lakshana. This is important. I'll explain why, because we can use this in many other places as we try to define God, define soul, define all sorts of things. So here, I'm breaking down this definition that we presented into these two portions. The first part, bhakti is an exclusive flow of loving consciousness towards Bhagavan. That is the swarupa lakshana. That is the inherent definition of bhakti. The word exclusive, ananya, right? Ekavritti, we talked about this earlier. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna uses this term, ananya, often. He says, ananya chetah satatam, which means you do not think of anything else. This is what Krishna says. This is the nature of devotion, the nature of relationship with God. You think of nothing else. Bhakti is exclusive. You see how that leans into a natural definition of Tadatmya-anubhāva. I like the word Mayuran used, eclipse, right? That one focus, that one absorption eclipses all other things. It covers it, right? So in that sense, as I said with the example with Swami Pratibha, that you have ekavritti, ananya, exclusive attention on that one thing. That is inherent to bhakti. Bhakti is necessarily of that nature. Exclusive. Okay? And I'm going to explain why it doesn't work towards other objects. It is a flow of loving consciousness, not just consciousness. So we also say that bhakti is defined as priti smarana, because priti means to have affection or love for something. And so priti smarana means loving contemplation, loving consciousness, loving thought. It's not that one may think of God as his enemy, to hate him, and then you say that is bhakti. There are ways you can spin this, but not really. By this definition, we're talking exclusive, loving contemplation, loving absorption. So it is important because we're defining the nature of the relationship, because other relationships can be had. You can say, if you remove the word exclusive and you remove the word loving, it would be bhakti is a flow of consciousness towards Bhagavan. It's not good enough. Because if I have occasional flow of consciousness towards Bhagavan, and it's one of jealousy towards Bhagavan, how can I term that as being bhakti? It's not. You are distorting the definition, in a sense destroying the meaning of the word. And so you see how important it is to understand and define with every word being considered, because it transmits a very different outcome. It's not just, oh, flow of consciousness towards Bhagavan, that's bhakti. No, it's exclusive flow of loving consciousness towards Bhagavan. Okay? And in the second part, Tatashta Lakshana, that results in a deep feeling of belonging, is expressed as seva, and puts an end to all suffering. These are almost the effects of bhakti on the one who expresses it and experiences it. So bhakti as an independent substance does not have destruction of sorrow as a feature, because destruction of sorrow is only relevant to the subjective being who possesses sorrow in the first place. Understand? So it is true that one who has sorrow, when he encounters true bhakti, said sorrow is destroyed. But one who does not possess sorrow and encounters bhakti, there is no sorrow to be destroyed. Therefore, destruction of sorrow cannot be an inherent definition of bhakti. Understand? But rather, it is still a true statement about bhakti. It is a true definition of bhakti from the position of the experiencer, the subjective person. Okay? This is why we're saying we're breaking these definitions into the inherent and the subjective. Sarupa and Tatashta. Okay? Now let me play this game with you so that you understand why you cannot have bhakti towards another human being. Let's suggest for example that bhakti is just pure love. Bhakti is just pure love. Let's play with that inherent definition. So that we remove now, not exclusive and loving from the Sarupa Lakshana, but we remove Bhagavan from the Sarupa Lakshana. And we say bhakti is an exclusive flow of loving consciousness. And so you think that you can direct this towards anyone and anything. So now let's suggest that I direct it towards Mayuran. I'm going to return the favor. Okay? I direct this exclusive loving consciousness towards Mayuran. Now I have to go to the Tatashta Lakshana and say, and that's going to result in a deep feeling of belonging. It's going to express itself as seva and puts an end to all suffering. Okay? Now, it may manifest as seva. I may serve him in some capacity. But my loving consciousness towards Mayuran will not result in an end of all my suffering. Why? Because he's a finite being. He is a limited being. And on account of his limitation, there is a limit to what he will do for me, in a sense. And his end will also coincide with the end of my ability to express love towards him. Correct? Even his Atma, let's go one step further, we'll say, but what if I love his Atma? Soulmate. Careful, I have vows. Okay? But even if we go there, will it still produce this exact Tatashta Lakshana? A deep feeling of belonging. So I said that if I have that relationship of consciousness towards his material self, because his material self will end, this sorrow cannot be ended by that. And now we go to the level of the soul and say, will there be a deep feeling of belonging? And the answer has to be no. Why? Because I don't factually. No soul belongs to another soul, but rather it is a Shakti, such as his soul is a Shakti, belonging to the holder of the Shaktis, the reservoir of Shaktis, Shakti Brit, which is Ishvara, Bhagavan. So at each point that you try to justify this, you'll be met with an incompatibility with the definition. It won't work. The only one to whom you can direct this exclusive flow of loving consciousness that will produce the feeling of belonging, that will end all suffering, that will also manifest as seva, is Bhagavan. Understand? So bhakti is important to be understood properly so that it's not misrepresented as just being love. Indiscriminate love to be sent to anyone in any capacity. Not true. That's why we have these definitions. Bhakti Yoga, Parabhakti, Aparabhakti, Sarupa Lakshana of Bhakti, Tatashta Lakshana of Bhakti, etc., etc. Okay? This naturally leads to the next slide, Pyar and Prem. Guruji actually evolved our concept of this really nicely recently. So we always spoke about this for years. Guruji's been speaking about it for years, that Pyar is this human love and Prem is this divine love. Okay? And it seemed very much like these are two different substances. One is better, the other one is worse. End of story. Don't pursue Pyar, pursue Prem. This was often how it was conceptualized. But Guruji clarified his stance beautifully in one of his tweets, in which he essentially said they are the same substance in a different state. So don't think of it as higher and lower, but he says rather think of it as limited and unlimited, pure and impure, but the same substance, in a sense, therefore meaning the same value even. Okay? I'll quote the exact reference. Guruji says, Pyar is gold from the mine, the ore of gold. Prema is the same gold, but purified to its best quality. And it shines. So there is a difference in purity, but not in value. Okay? I say this first, and now I'm going to go back and explain. Pyar and Prem are reflections of the other. So you know in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, verse 1, Krishna speaks about the Ashwata tree. There is an upside down tree. So he uses this as an analogy to explain this reality. So this reality is an upside down reflection of the higher reality. So when you see a body of water, you see a reflection, you're upside down, right? So similarly, this world, Prakriti, is a reflection of the higher reality, of Vaikuntha, let's say. Consequently, everything you are materially is a reflection of what you are spiritually. You have the material mind, which is a reflection, a broken reflection of the spiritual mind. You have a material body, which is a conditioned, limited reflection of your spiritual body. It has similarity. It is the same substance in some sense, but very limited. Okay? It's true of all things, but especially this example, love. So when you love someone in a material way, limited, we call this pyar, love for your mother, love for your friend, love for your family, love for your dog, whatever it may be. It is the same thing as prem, but it is impure, limited. And so our objective is to purify that. Okay? That is the process. It's taking the golden ore and making it pure gold. No one wears the jewelry with golden ore. You go to the mine and you mine the gold and it's mixed with all this impurity and then you put it on your chest and go, look, gold. No, there's a reason you pay big money to the jeweler, because they're making the process, they smelt that ore, make it into the golden jewelry that you then want to wear, shiny, beautiful, pure, right? So the same process goes on here. I must move on even though it's an interesting topic. The nature of surrender. So we talked about the nature of bhakti, right? What are some of the things I said about bhakti? That there is both a path and a result, an outcome. Apara bhakti, secondary, and para bhakti. I then said that there was our Sampradaya definition of bhakti, and I broke it down into inherent and subjective. Okay? Then we spoke about the nature of love. We said that love is pyar and prem, same substance, different state, limited, unlimited, impure, pure. Now we talk about the nature of surrender. So as Sri Vaiṣṇavas, they make a very clear distinction between Bhakti Yoga and Sharanagati. So they say we reject Bhakti Yoga, we accept only Sharanagati. So Sharanagati is what? That I give myself to the Lord and the Lord will, as a result, give himself to me. There is no process. There is no I will please him and gradually purify myself. There is no concept of sadhana. So the idea that an ore must be purified into pure gold doesn't exist. You just give the ore as it is to Bhagavan, and Bhagavan will accept it. End of story. We don't make that harsh distinction in our Sampradaya. We're essentially saying that that hard line between Bhakti Yoga and Sharanagati is destroyed to some extent. They are interdependent. You cannot perform Sharanagati unless there is Bhakti. And no true bhakti happens without Sharanagati as an intention. Okay? So, we are saying that we begin the process with a mindset of prapatti, which means to take refuge. It's preliminary sharanagati, in a sense. The mindset of taking refuge. And that eventually transforms by grace into the perfection of sharanagati. So even our surrender, the nature of surrender, exists on a spectrum. The intention at first to give yourself, and the ultimate end result of that intention, which is the actual state of surrender, in which the Lord's will eclipses yours. Yeah? So we talked about this a little bit in the tent last night, that was one of the debates that we had with Guruji. Does the jiva have independent will, even in Vaikuntha or not? And so the two wills, the Lord's and the jiva's, it does not get obliterated, the will of the jiva, because it's inherent to the jiva. It's part of the jiva's composition to have will, but rather it gets eclipsed because the jiva surrenders itself to sit below the Lord, right? So the Lord's will covers the will of the jiva, and so they move as one. Understand? So this eclipsing principle is important. Yeah, that is the nature of surrender. That is the outcome of surrender. The individual's will is therefore becomes perfectly aligned with the will of Śrī Hari. Okay? Last slides. Satguru Yoga. So we hear about Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Shadanga Yoga, which is Sharanagati. And now we are talking about Satguru Yoga. Guruji mentioned this in his tweets. And there was a tweet when he mentioned this Satguru Yoga. And I remember reading this tweet and thinking, what is this now? And so I had that reaction, and I remember Mayuran and others, they liked it. They were like, Satguru Yoga, that's it. That's what I do. Brilliant. Satguru Yoga. And immediately we're like propping this up. This got to go in the Siddhānta. Satguru Yoga is the thing. And I'm like, well, it's just one reference. It's one tweet. Let's not exaggerate now and act like this is the thing, right? But then the more you unpack it and then you speak with Guruji and you understand what he means by it, you go, well, okay, it's the thing. Let's talk about it. So the same way I defined Bhakti Yoga as being exclusively the path. So I said Bhakti is one thing, and then when you say Bhakti Yoga, you mean Bhakti as a means, right? As a way to create what? Union. So similarly, if you ask me, define Satguru Yoga, I will firstly say it is a means. It is a path, okay? A path towards what? Literally, just as Bhakti Yoga is a path by which yoga, union, can be achieved with Śrī Hari, so too is Satguru Yoga. Okay? Union through Bhakti, Bhakti Yoga. Satguru Yoga, union through the Satguru. Okay? So at that first definitional level, a very basic comparison, yeah? Union through Bhakti, Bhakti Yoga. Union through the Satguru, Satguru Yoga. Okay? However, the Satguru, why would one do this? Why should one even contemplate this? Because the Satguru, by definition, is the one who can grant realization, tādātmya-anubhāva, to the individual by his mere will. So the Satguru is defined as one who can grant realization, the supreme realization, Parama Bhakti, Prema, Tadatmya-anubhāva, to a person by his mere sankalpa, by his choice. Today, Guruji can walk in here and say, you, boom, realization, done. Nothing stops him from being able to do that. That is the definition of Satguru. Now, he doesn't by choice. Now, he may also say, because you don't want it. And then we'll have to explore it, because you'll argue with me and say, I do want it. There's levels to this, right? Maybe you think you want it, but you don't really. Different talk for another day. In Satguru Yoga, the key ingredient is therefore what? The Guru's grace. Guru Kripa. Okay? Everything in Satguru Yoga is dependent on Guru Kripa. The grace of the Guru is trusted as the exclusive means of attaining the spiritual goal. So in Bhakti Marga, yes, we have Bhagavad Bhakti, Bhakti towards the Lord. We also have Bhakti towards the Guru. But in a sense, Satguru Yoga eclipses Bhagavad Bhakti. They both exist, but one takes precedence over the other because we understand that the other one cannot happen devoid of the grace of the Guru. So the grace of the Guru is the catalyst that makes the whole process unfold, including your relationship with God. Yeah? And this will be better understood once you understand our Satguru Tattva. Because for us, we are living in a very confused community, Bhakti Marga. I'll tell you why. Because we walk around saying Guruji is a Satguru, Guruji is a Satguru, as if he is the default type of Satguru that you'll encounter. He's not. He's a little bit of a unique Satguru. And that is properly explained in the chapter on the Satguru Tattva. Because there are different types of Satgurus. If you say the Satguru is always Bhagavan, Sakshat Bhagavan, Śrīman Narayana, Śrī Hari, right? That chart that you saw earlier, that is the Satguru, yeah? Then you've got a problem. Because Guruji has also said, for example, that Shankaracharya was a Satguru. And he said, Shankaracharya is Shiva. So how can he be Śrī Hari? If A equals B, and supposedly B equals C, then A has to equal C too. But Shiva does not equal Śrī Hari. You're destroying the boundaries of Tattva. So something is wrong in that equation. And what is wrong in that equation is the assumption that all Satgurus are Śrī Hari. It's not the case. And so that is explained here. You may have left the Guru Gita commentary thinking that was the case. It's not the case. Remember what I told you last night? The last 10% of the book was finished after the Guru Gita course, and everything came together. That's the 10%. Okay? So, as I said, in the Hari Bhakta Sampradāya, our relationship, Bhakti, has two divisions. Bhakti towards the Satguru and Bhakti towards Śrī Hari. But as I explained, Bhakti towards Satguru, in a sense, is the catalyst for Bhakti towards Śrī Hari. And they have a symbiotic relationship, but Guru Kripa is the ingredient that unfolds the path, that makes everything function. Okay? I want to end with this quote, because this encapsulates the entire purpose of this Siddhānta, of Tadatmya Vedanta, of the intellectual exercise that this essentially is in the service of love. Yeah? Guruji, it's been almost 10 years since Guruji asked me to begin what was then known as the Bhakti Marga Academy, right? So it's been almost 10 years since we started this department and we started this, systematic teaching and presentation of knowledge in Bhakti Marga. And at the very beginning, he sat me down and he said, so as you're going to head this, please understand what I understand by knowledge, what value I attribute to knowledge, so that you don't misrepresent that. Knowledge is only useful in so much as it promotes love for God. Because the actual outcome of life, the actual objective, the purushartha, is para bhakti, prema. Remember the terms I used earlier? Purushartha, the goal. Para bhakti, the highest bhakti. And what is para bhakti synonymous with? Prema. Okay? So that is the goal of life, love. And so he says, knowledge is only of value in so much as it services that goal. Not in the sense of just satisfying curiosity. Not in the sense of satisfying mental gymnastics and whatever else may happen. Yeah? Pure intellectualism for intellectualism's sake is of no interest to us. And so if you pick up something like this and you think, well, this is just a lot of mind stuff, you're missing the point. This is mind stuff, yes, because your mind happens to be integral to this process of reaching para bhakti. Neglecting your mind because it's not of ultimate value is like saying, I neglect the vehicle that is going to take me to my destination because only the destination matters. Think how stupid that sounds. Understand? Oh, I'm trying to get to America. What do I need? A plane. And you arrive and the plane is falling apart. Rubbish condition. Not inspected. Not scrutinized. Not looked after. Not molded properly. And you go, yeah, no problem. I got no problem with this. And you just jump right inside because I don't care about the plane. I just care about getting to America. And then 1 hour into the flight, and you fall into the ocean and die. And then pat yourself on the back. I cared about the right thing, right? No, you would just call it stupidity. So Bhakti, I'll never forget, Guruji quoted, he said, Bhakti is not stupid. Yeah? Bhakti is not an ignorant path. It's not sentimentalism. It's not just emotion. Yeah? Emotions are the limited reflection of bhava, just like pyar is the limited reflection of prema. Okay? Don't confuse these things. Learn to value things in the proper way. And so this final verse from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad says, to that Mahatma who has great devotion to the Lord and equal devotion to the Guru, the meanings of the matters spoken herein are revealed. So the meanings of the matters spoken herein where? In the Upanishads. What is contained in Shastra will be revealed to one who has equal amounts of devotion to God and the Guru. Therefore, two paths of devotion leading into revelation, into vijnana, realized knowledge. Not information, jnana, vijnana, realized knowledge. Okay? And this is trying to map that out systematically. Yeah? As Mayuran said, you're not going to read this and instantly attain tādātmya-anubhāva. Okay? Not at all. But it's going to set the foundation, as he very aptly put, for you to build the temple. Okay? As he said, underneath these deities, which are our object of love, there is a foundation that holds them up for you to be able to worship. That is what this is. Now, as sad as it is, see you in 6 months when we release the book, in a sense, right? Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Just two small points that I repeated to repeat last night. If you're worried about being ungrounded, this is the perfect solution to that. If you feel like I get into fantasy and all this, read that book. Read that book intensely. You'll be so grounded, you'll be underground, right? And I'll also say, I repeat what I said last night. Just these principles, we whiz through it, and I'm sure many of you might be dazzled and think, wow, I didn't really get all of that. It's a bit complicated. But if you just take the time, like I said, over the next few months, once the teachers start teaching, and then listen to Guruji's satsangs again, and then have that philosophical matrix and that framework, and you'll just get his satsangs. And it will go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you can hold it in your mind, and you'll really appreciate some of the sentiments that Guruji is making. Yeah,
so just as we had said in the beginning, although it's true that this book is only going to come out to the public in 4 to 6 months, however long it takes, because of what I explained last night, we have to first train these orange people and these red people and the teachers, and it's going to take some time. Yeah, we've rushed through this. This is 400 pages. This is absolutely just an introduction, in a sense. He did say that we're doing the podcast. So as I said, 3 2-hour sessions. So there'll be another 6 hours released every 2 weeks so that you can still have something to keep you sort of following along until eventually we release the book. Okay? So if you're a knowledge teacher, we'll see you soon for some work. And if not, then see you later. Jai Gurudev.